Peter Hoffman essay is that he'll try to in some ways try to identify, well, what is it that does make me different from you, right? And if you think about it, what if, well, I was born in Joliet in 1955. Where were you born? Cambridge, Mass. What year? 85. In 85. So we share all kinds of things, but it's the way in which you showed up in the world that's different from the way in which I showed up in the world. And my body has something to do with that. So bodies just don't exist out there floating out there. They have a very specific, if I dare use the word, evolutionary history, right? And so we're thrown into the world in a very precise way. So there's a specific temporality that I have that's not yours. And part of that specific temporality has to do with the fact that only I will die. My death is going to be my own death. And this is one of Heidegger's great insights. He says, guess what? Right? Think about this. This is really, really weird. I will never experience my death as an actuality. I can only experience the possibility of my dying. Someday, I use this example in class frequently, and it sometimes makes students a little uncomfortable, but I say, someday you'll open up the alumni magazine or the Suite of State and say, Dr. Murphy kicked the bucket, right? And just, oh, Dr. Murphy, I remember him so well. And so you will experience my death as an actuality, right? But I will never experience my death as an actuality, Heidegger argues. I only experience my death as a possibility. Okay? So what seems to make me unique to me, right, is that it's the future nature that's the trajectory, the project that I'm on, right? But we share something fundamental, not just, and I like the point about, we share this evolutionary past that shapes our present. That's just a beautiful insight, that we share all kinds of things that we just have a very basic understanding, very preliminary understanding. Is that working for you? So so what Heidegger's going to say here is that there's something that separates us or differentiates us from all other people. But there's also something that joins us. So there's something that makes me uniquely me, but the same thing that makes me uniquely me is also the thing that makes it possible for us to share a world. So we are being toward death in a world with each other. That's how he starts to talk. That we're all, Dasein is mit Dasein, being with others in the world. And Dasein is always being towards death. We're all headed toward it. But only I will die my death. You can't die my death for me.
I'll tell you what, I don't think I'd like to go out drinking with Heidegger. It doesn't seem a very cheerful.
Yeah, I don't think I want to go drink with him either. But just because he was a Nazi.
Wow. Yeah. Well, you're selling him to me. All right.
Yeah, but he was German, so maybe the beer would be good.
Well.
Yeah, I'll let you call the names.
Anthony's been waiting for a long time, okay. So.
It's funny you bring up that. And so, yeah, killer. So, he says that you have to have physicality to kind of maintain these interactions that you have.
I think he says you have to have it to define the interactions more than maintain them. Sorry, have a physicality to maintain.
Right, he says it's necessary at some point because...
He says a virtual or a physical, I think.
Something you have to have.
Yeah, you have to have
something there. And I wonder about, it's something that you said about death when you say, somebody else will experience your death and they'll remember you.
As an actuality.
Right.
So I was drawing a distinction between experiencing something as possible versus experiencing something as actual.
But that's still tied to you, and is that in the sense of still art? Is that still an interaction? Is that still you, a representation of you?
What is the ed that you're referring to?
Like when you're recalling something, when you're somehow changed by the interaction of that person with you, regardless of whether they're there or they're not, whether it's indirect or whether they're alive or dead. So what does what he have to say or what he's saying right now, what does that have in terms of implication on death?
We're talking about Schrodinger's interaction here.
So like, I mean, Stellark, we're talking about Stellark here, but, you know, let's say he's gone tomorrow, you know, we still have Stellark, kind of, you know, those pieces embedded in us. And
We
still
have
to talk about
our perception of Stellark, we have. Other people will have a different perception.
Yeah, and so the sum of that, should that not be approaching what he's talking about, his own, like, I guess, essence to be?
His existence is defined by many of the others in the interaction. I think he'd like that. I think
you would too, yeah.
Yeah.
We have, when we're thinking about identity, we often think about it as something that is a substance, right? An entity. We think of it as something that's isolatable and autonomous, okay? But the more we think about any kind of entity, the more likely it is that we'll think about it as a complex event, okay? And so that's why the images of networks are more interesting. So I can get to the idea of thinking about myself as a network if I think of myself as an event, as a complex series of many different kinds of interacting and usually reciprocal processes, okay? And I think that's the shift that Stellark is involved in. So if I think of my body as somehow an entity that's closed off, what Aristotle would call a substance, and I think, right, it gives me a sense of autonomy, of individuality, and I can make those things primary. But the more we realize about our biological processes and our social processes and the way language acts on those things, and then there are things
and
that
the
shatter.
evolutionary nature of
Pardon?
what's happened, and the evolutionary nature of who we are.
Yeah, right. The minute we start thinking of ourselves as complex systems, then it's easier to let go of this idea that we're unique, that we're unique in every way. But I don't want to let go of Matt's perception. I do live with this sense, right? That there's something that's me that persists. And that's fine. It's just that we have to reconsider what that would be from the perspective of thinking of it as a network rather than thinking of it as some kind of autonomous subjectivity.
Well, what's funny about what Matt said is everything that he used off the top of his head to define who he is, his interaction between him and something else.
Yeah.
You said, you know, how you interact with me, my friends, and hanging out and stuff.
That's who so although you were trying to define yourself as you, the phrases you used were all about how you are perceived by other people.
Aren't they almost one and the same, but they're completely different at the same time. It's like, well, you know, what comes first, the flame or the light? It's almost like instantaneous, you know what I mean? Like as soon as you light lighter, you see it, the light, it will put the device on fire at the same time. So it's like our personalities almost come amongst our interactions with people. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like it's very, I don't know, it's just weird. Yeah.
Linguistically speaking, instead of it being an either or, either I am a subject, an autonomous person, right, or I'm lost in some vast network, right? It's both and,
Yeah.
right?
That's what I'm trying to say.
It's not an either or structure, it's a both and structure.
I'm reading a Trans-Humanism book on cyborg theatre at the moment, and 2 of the chapters have done exactly this, considering theatre as an actor, as an individual, a kind of subjective person within themselves and projecting outwards, and considering them as this networked ability who is totally defined by the people watching them. And they've done 2 chapters that just took those opposing views, you know, so it's, yeah, what you're saying is ringing a lot of bells with me, and books I'm reading on this at the moment as well, so, yeah. Patricia, I think was next.
I just wanted to ask, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was reading The Death, Time, and History by Hoffman, and he's talking about Heidegger, it seems like it's almost the opposite of what Stellark is saying. Because, okay, it is, all right.
It could be, yeah.
Because he's saying that being a member of the public world, he actually could easily have been replaced or represented by another person. Like somebody else could have had his job, somebody else could have married his wife, like somebody else could have taken that. And that he also said that what makes you you is not your interaction of social and natural roles and functions that you share or may not share with other people. So I feel like it's almost saying the exact opposite.
If I remember that part of the essay, what he's saying is what makes you you or me is my individual death. right?
Right, exactly.
Right. So now Heidegger has, what he's also referring to there is this concept of what Heidegger calls das Mann in German, and it gets translated in different ways. That's what you're referring to there, where you have this notion of what sometimes is translated as the they self.
Okay.
So that would be the public character of social interaction, and so it's an inauthentic, for Heidegger, it's an inauthentic way of existing. If you just kind of take on any kind of social or public persona, right? Is that making some sense, or?
Sort of not. Well, I see. No, that what you're saying makes sense. It's just, I guess that's not how I read it. Maybe I just interpreted it wrong.
Yeah, you may have just been seeing it. Heidegger is critical of das Mann, or the they self.
Okay.
He's not asserting that that's the way it is. He's asserting that that way of thinking about ourselves is forgetful or inadequate.
Okay. Any more comments on this? Sorry, Brian.
I was sort of thinking about them, questioning if we could reprogram human beings. And I would say that yes, we can do that right now. It's like post-traumatic stress disorder, Stockholm syndrome, all terrible things that are either inflicted upon us or that our brains do to try and cope with something traumatic. And it's sort of, you can still be Mark, but you're not really Mark after whatever it happens to you. Because something
He's not Mark, he's Matt, but yeah.
Because something has significantly changed your life. It's usually bad.
We talked about that at the beginning of the semester about identity and becoming more of yourself and everything. But I mean, like, could you wake up tomorrow and have a different accent, have a different personality, a different outlook, like everything, like completely reprogramming who you are? Has that ever been done in the history of human civilization? Are we able to literally reprogram ourselves?
But the
There's
problem
something
with
about you that's you when you wake up tomorrow. You
Matt,
change that.
The problem with that is, how would you know?
Exactly. That's all we can observe in other people, right? Like Brian can wake up tomorrow and that is not Brian. He's not walking the same, talking the same, eating the same.
There's a lot of Twilight Zone episodes about that kind of thing.
But if you can't do that, then that means to me that there has to be some kind of point of origin of who we are. I don't know what we call it.
Well, it was interesting, as soon as you said that, the two evolutionary psychologists stuck their hands. Totally. Aaron was first.
Yeah, this almost sounds like the crocoduck argument from creationists. Like, why can't a crocoduck evolve? And if that happened, then why can't that happen? If things can change through evolutions, kind of thing. It doesn't happen because it would take so much rewiring all at once that it just doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that it couldn't happen. Theoretically, it just doesn't happen because it's so elaborate.
Whose theory is that? I mean, where's the theoretical paper that says it's possible?
Well,
You know what I mean? Like,
Based on everything, based on all of neuroscience, all of neuroscience and all of genealogy, everything about you is made up by nature and nurture, genetics and your environment. And theoretically, based on all of those, it is possible to.
But individual facets of things you said, changing language, changing your person, have happened. Individual components of that. People have woken up where something's rewired, or damage can change your brain in very bizarre ways to rewire.
Gauge is no longer gauge.
Accents can change. You think I was born with this accent? I had a serious head trauma and started talking like an Englishman.
Actually, I started talking like an Irishman. I had Guillain-Barré, and so I was partially paralyzed for about a month. And part of what happened is that the nerves in on the right side of my face were affected. And so when I was admitted into the hospital, it sounded like I had an Irish accent. And all the nurses kept saying, "You're not from around here, are you? You're not from around." So there is a way in which these kinds of traumas can
But they don't rewire the whole brain. But Brian,
Oliver Sacks' book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, is full of these kinds of examples. You might be interested in. And I'm looking at that where I was
Is that what you were going to say?
But it's still, I mean, same with like what Patrick just said, it's still what other people think. Like you didn't think you had an Irish accent, the nurses thought.
I could hear that there was something different about my voice.
Right, but that wasn't on.
But I couldn't, I wasn't like hearing that I had
Right.
it.
But it's so, but it was somebody else who brought it up, and that's, I guess, where I think you're trying to get a little time distance there. That it's other people. Like if I woke up tomorrow and like I'm gonna be me no matter what, right? Like even if I was something completely different in the light of everybody else, right? I'm still me. I don't know that.
I know. I don't think it's possible to just not be you. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a point of origin, and I don't know how to describe it with ego or with what Stellar's trying to say. I don't know the language for it, except for what I'm saying right now is that we each have something about us that is unique about us.
But this
Our
is
personality, whatever you want to call it, but it's a thing. It's an entity. I think it's an entity. I think it's there.
But what Patrick has said over and over when we have these discussions is that the level we're talking on, try to break this down into some sort of semantic square or the kind of techniques we've been talking about in your discussions together. We have been trying to teach you in some ways or instruct you in how to have these arguments in a way that is deeper and make the language more precise. You exactly said that, I don't know how to say this. Investigate how to say it.
Yeah,
how do other people say it? How do they talk about it? How can you define this?
Well, this is all interesting. I don't know much about hidden ego and all that.
But then read, look this stuff up. This is what we want you to do, to find ways of talking about it. We don't, by the end of the class, we don't want you saying, I don't know how to talk about this.
Because this is just a rush of information right now, so I'm like,
Yeah.
sure, it's slow, you know, it's like,
One thing that you're looking for is a point, you keep repeating the phrase an origin.
yeah.
And a lot of people will say, well, that concept of origin is going to get you into trouble. Because what makes me unique, for example, is the possibility of my own death. The origin that's making me unique is out there in the future. It's not back there in the past. Okay? So one of the things that you'll have to think about is time. You might need to examine some of your preconceptions about time when you're thinking about the unique nature of an identity. A couple of ways to think about this just really quickly is, instead of thinking about the identity of an entity, right, we made a big step in our progress in our thinking when we started to think about identities as relations. So when linguists said, for example, that language isn't made up of individual words that we combine to form phrases and clauses and sentences. So in other words, language isn't constituted by these individual isolated units that we then combine. No, the shift in thinking was, language is an arbitrary system of signification that's socially agreed upon. And so when that shift of thinking occurred in the 1920s and 30s, what we began to realize is identity is a relation, not an entity. Okay? And that was the point that a lot of you were making a second ago in relationship to Matt's point, that he was talking about relations. Now, what we've done in the age of computer science, I think, is we've taken a step beyond that. And we're just on the edge of this, where we're starting to think things aren't really about relations so much as they're about interacting systems, mutually reciprocal interactions. But see, I can draw a picture on a two-dimensional surface about a system that is relation. Right? So I can talk about the relationship between the phonemes A, E, I, O, and U. Right? And we can think about this as a system. And it can be adequately mapped in a two-dimensional space. But the minute we shift from thinking about things in terms of thinking about identity in terms of we shift from substance or entities to relations, but the minute we take the next shift and we start thinking about the interaction of complex systems that we have to model, then we can't do it on a two-dimensional space. And it's only with the rise of computer modeling, I think, that we can begin to imagine models that will match the complexity of the problem that you're raising. Okay, so in other words, think about what I was saying about the point of origin, right? If you think about an origin as something in the future, how do you map that in a two-dimensional space? You're dealing with at least 3 dimensions, and maybe not really more when it comes to time, right? Is that making some sense? So we just have a very hard time imagining appropriately complex abstract models for the things that we're discovering now. Anyway, I'll let you go on that.
Well, Tom's got the last one in the hand.
I was just going to ask with regard to like reprogramming self and all that. What about being trauma-inducing amnesia? If you don't know if all of a sudden you don't know who everybody around you is, you don't know, you have no idea of any sort of relations that you already have, are you still you? Is that like a complete...
On this scenario, you're also unaware of who you are?
Yes.
I would imagine if I didn't recognize anybody else, I wouldn't be able to recognize myself.
It's the kind of thing, like, the case being like, you can remember, like, you know facts and things like that. So you can tell what the capital of Washington State is or something like that. That's something that always pops in. That's one of the things that I think I read a story where that was one. But you can't tell who the person that gave birth to you is.
Okay.
So is that an example like of you not being you anymore because you have no sort of recollection?
Let's phrase the question as, are you the sum of your memories?
Well, no. Because I'm not only, on this model that I'm proposing, I'm not only the sum of my memories, right, but there's this future that I'm facing. So the only reason I have memories is because I'm facing the future.
And we've talked over and over that the memories, I guess, are pieces of information, video, whether we image, video, in whatever storage could be stored on a computer, they do not constitute intelligence. We've said that over and over. So I would say that isn't what makes us human, just memory. And we've said over and over in this class that interaction is
the quick response that I'd have to that is, I think what Stellark's saying and what I've been implying where I agree with Stellark is that, and with Heidegger, is that what makes us human is possibility. Right? What makes us human is that we are non-souls and non-bodies. Right?
And more.
Right? In other words, what is that negation of those old vocabularies opens up the possibility that we could be other things. And what really seems to be making us human is that we can continue to make our own humanity. Right? So, or that we, or to put it differently, so because we don't want to posit our own making as a point of origin, that we can participate in this making of humanity. We don't have to claim it as our own because there would be no subject to claim it as property.
We're going to have to wrap it up. We're getting to the point. I've got to say that I was actually quite thrilled to find this today because when I read it, a few weeks ago, I'd have skimmed over it and skimmed over some of the parts, and now I knew what they meant. I felt like I could read it a little bit deeper than I would have normally. I would have still read this article, but not in the same way I would have a few weeks ago, and I hope that's the same for many of you as well. So I do advise you to go and look at this for yourself as well. It's a nice little.
Yeah,
not exactly a summary, but a nice parallel to what we've been talking about. Okay, so we will see you all next week, and next week I promise we will talk about projects. This was just too good